Please come to order. Join me in the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, please call the roll.
Young. Bachman.
Here.
Rainerworth.
Here.
Stryland.
Here.
Here. Peterson.
Here. I'd like to announce that there will be no policy and planning meeting following the regular council meeting tonight. Do I hear a motion for approval of the tentative agenda?
So moved.
And Stryland?
Support.
Support Bachman. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk, call the roll.
Stryland.
Yes.
Bachman.
Yes.
Rainerworth.
Yes.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to item number 3, a proclamation recognizing the 50th anniversary of municipal home rule in Iowa. Whereas home rule is essential to effective and responsive municipal government in Iowa and provides flexibility to make decisions at the local level, where decisions are made closest to the people they impact and can be tailored to fit local conditions, needs, concerns in order to better serve taxpayers. And whereas the City of Pella supports home rule and the powers it provides to make local decisions that best reflect the residents of our community, and whereas the citizens of Iowa approved the adoption of home rule in the Constitution of Iowa on November the 5th, 1968, and whereas this is the 50th year of municipal home rule in Iowa, and whereas home rule continues to be vital to the health and prosperity of all cities in Iowa, I, therefore, James Mueller, the mayor of the City of Pella, do hereby recognize the 50th anniversary of municipal home rule in Iowa and proudly support its continued authority. Dated this 18th day of December 2018. We will now move on to number 4 on the agenda. I would like to announce that there will be a closed session. Nope, on second thought, we are pulling that. We're canceling the closed session for this evening. So we'll move on to public forum. If there's anyone in attendance that would like to address the council regarding any agenda items, please step forward, speak into the microphone, give us your name, address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes, please. Seeing none, we'll move on to the approval of the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion for approval?
So moved.
Skibout?
Support.
Support Peterson. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk, call the roll.
Skibout.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
Bachman.
Yes.
Rainerworth.
Yes.
Stryland.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to section D, public hearings. 1A, a public hearing on the proposed vacation of an alley running north and south through the 700 block between Independence and Peace Street in the City of Pella. Mike, if you'd explain, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to. I'd like to refer everyone's attention to the big board for a brief presentation on this item. And this evening, as Mayor discussed during hours, we will be talking about the proposed alley vacation. Now, this alley vacation is being requested by Hardy Holdings and First Baptist Church. And specifically, we're talking about the alley between Independence Street to the north and Peace Street to the south. The particular alleyway section that we're talking about this evening would be this about 150 feet right up here. It has the green diagonal lines through it. It's very important to note that the yellow area of this alley was actually vacated in the 1950s. So the proposed alley vacation this evening is the green highlighted area right up here. Very also important to note as a part of this that all utilities were notified of the proposed easement vacations, and as far as to our knowledge, we do not believe there are any utilities located in the proposed vacation this evening. So let's go ahead, please, Cory. Now, in order to approve this request, the council must make a finding that the alley vacation is in accordance with the comprehensive plan, and that this will not adversely affect any neighboring property owners or the general public. Now, as far as the comprehensive plan is concerned, it does not identify the alley as a right-of-way or potential thoroughfare between Independence and Peace Street. And as far as the property owners are concerned, the only property owners impacted are the property owners that are requesting the vacation this evening. In addition, everyone within 200 feet of the property owners within 200 feet is notified of the proposed vacation as well. Now, overall, Mr. Mayor, we are recommending approval this evening of this ordinance as staff believes the vacation request is compatible with the city's comprehensive plan, and we do not believe that the proposed vacation would like to point out that the Planning and Zoning Commission did discuss this request at their November 26th meeting and unanimously approved the proposed ordinance that we're considering this evening. So with that, we'd be more than happy to answer any questions the mayor and council may have on this item.
Thank you, Mike. Mandy, any written comments received?
No.
Any oral comments from the council? Any oral comments from members of the audience? Do I hear a motion to close the public hearing? Steve out?
Support.
Support Bachhoven? All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Skibout.
Yes.
Bachhoven.
Yes.
Reindeerhorst.
Yes.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to number 1B, ordinance number 953, entitled an ordinance vacating the alley running north and south through the 700 block between Independence and P Streets in the city of Pella. This is the first reading. Mike, is there anything to add?
No, sir.
Do I hear a motion for approval?
So moved. Support.
Van Strylen and support Skibout. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Skibout. Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Bachhoven.
Yes.
Reindeerhorst.
Yes.
Motion carried. Number 2A, a public hearing on a proposal to enter into a development agreement with South Main One LLC. Mike, can you explain, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to. And as the mayor said this evening, with this resolution that we are considering this evening, actually approves and authorizes the development agreement with the city of Pella and South Main One for proposed housing development at the former Webster School site. Now, as far as when we talk about the housing development, Mr. Mayor and council, it is important to realize that this is proposed to be a signature mixed-use development for South Central Iowa, but not even go as far as state. But we're really, when we're talking about the development itself, it'll be a showcase development for the state of Iowa. And the intentions of the development are to provide a unique, high-quality housing project for our community as well. Now, overall, the development will consist of 42 housing units that have diverse price points within the development as well. I think it goes without saying, when considering the development, it will contain many high-end finishes, courtyard, extensive landscaping, as well as the community building. Overall, when we talk about the overall estimated cost of the project, it's right at $16.5 million. Let's go ahead, please, Courtney. Before discussing the project and also the terms of the proposed development agreement, I always think it's a good idea to understand why we're doing this in the first place, or what's the incentive for the city for considering additional housing in our community. As the council is well aware, but maybe members in the audience or those maybe watching at home might find beneficial that the Marion County Housing Assessment identified an additional 966 housing units that were needed in our community to meet housing demands through the year 2025. Now, when we look at that additional 966 housing units, that equates to roughly about a 15% increase in our housing stock, and that's a significant increase on it as well. Now, when we look at the 966 housing units, they're really mixed evenly between rental housing units, meaning for single-family homes, as well as housing for seniors or for those folks over 55 and older as well. Now, in addition to the Marion County Housing Assessment, the city's large employers have voiced concerns over the lack of housing in the community, and also stated concerns that it could be an impediment to growth in the future as well, the lack of housing. So let's go ahead, please, Cory. Now, we've been very active over the last 18 months with housing developments, and if someone were to ask of the 966 housing units, how are we doing? Right now, we believe the answer is we're about 18% of the way there. We've approved or evaluated the city of Pella's level of approximately 172 housing units, and that's equates to about 18% of the 966 housing units. Now, of that 172 housing units, they're all in various different stages of development. But overall, as far as plans being presented to the city of Pella, specifically the Planning and Zoning Commission, the numbers of 172 housing units. Let's go ahead, please, Cory. Now, considering this proposed development, it's also very important to note the urban renewal plan that was established in October this year by the city council. When we talk about the urban renewal plan, it's this middle map that we have right up here on the big board. And as you can see, generally speaking, it consists of the former Webster School site. It extends briefly here and captures the three homes north of Independence Street right up here, but by and large, it's the former Webster School site that we have down here. When we talk about the urban renewal plan, the primary objective of the plan is to provide opportunities and incentives for redevelopments that also promote blight remediation as well. The secondary goal, or equal not a secondary private investment and new residential development, which is also enhances economic vitality of the community. Now, we do believe that the proposed development we are considering this evening strongly meets both of these goals that we have listed up here on the big board. Equally important to note is a part of the urban renewal plan adoption process for the Webster Park urban renewal plan, we did hire a consultant to evaluate the area. The consultant felt that 75% of the urban renewal plan that we just highlighted right up here was blighted under Iowa law. And generally, when we talk about the blighted properties within the urban renewal area, talking about the Webster School building, right here, the former Webster School building, as well as the yellow house on Main Street that's directly north of the Webster School building. Both of those properties were defined as blighted under Iowa law, and that encompasses about 75% of the area within this proposed urban renewal area. So let's go ahead, please, Corey. Now, as far as the request that we are considering, that's a major cornerstone of this development agreement. A lot of things that we'll be talking about this evening really stem off the financial request for the project. It's very important to understand two aspects. What's being proposed by the developers is a 42-unit signature mixed-use development. Because of the complexity of the project, specifically when we're talking about infill development, also a blighted area, which is namely the Webster School area on this, the developer is requesting to receive economic development grant funds. And commonly, this is referred to as tax increment financing. Very important concept that we're going to be talking about this evening is that the grant funds that they're proposing to receive will be generated by the development over the next 20 years. Now, as far as the upper limits for the maximum reimbursements to the developers, the maximum limit under the development agreement is $6.1 million over a 20-year period of time. So these are new property taxes that are generated by the development over the next 20 years. So if the developer pays that amount of money in property taxes to the City of Pella, what's being proposed is that that will be rebated over time. And we'll be diving into the specifics of this here very shortly. Let's go ahead, please, Corey. I think we've covered this point up here, but again, we're talking about new property taxes or property taxes that would be generated from the development property. So this would be property taxes from housing development. Very important to understand that the city would only pay the developer if incremental property taxes are collected from the development. Now, looking at the terms of the risk of the development agreement, staff believes that since this nature of this development proposed is to reimburse the developer on future property taxes received from the developer, most of the risk for the $16.5 million project is transferred to the developer under the agreement. And this is simply because the grants, because they only receive grants, and the amount of increased property taxes that are actually generated by the project and collected as tax increment by the city. So in other words, if you look at it, it's conditional. If they pay that amount of property taxes, they're scheduled to receive it. So when you look at the development, the blighted area, the 3 acres of blight that we have on the Webster School site, also building a $16.5 to $17 million project that are here and receiving rebates over the next 20 years only if you pay property taxes to the City of Pella. We believe, as far as the risk assessment, that most of this is transferred to the developer, under this agreement. In addition, when you look at these requests, it's very important to understand when we talk about housing developments and rebating property taxes over a period of time. One of the things that you need to analyze is the service loads or the workloads that could be generated by the development. And looking at this 42-unit housing development, we believe that the City of Pella can serve this development here without triggering significant increases in the city's workloads, which may, if that were the case, there would be significant increases, then you always have to talk about general increases in taxes and fees as a result of it. We do not believe that's going to be the case in looking at this as far as the service levels for this development as well. So from our standpoint, the rebate agreements, we believe that we can serve the development on here without triggering a significant amount of increases in the city's workload. So let's go ahead, please, Corey. Now, as far as to further elaborate on the financial request, it's very important to understand that tax increment financing revenues are only a portion of the total tax revenues paid to the City of Pella. Traditionally, they're about 85% of the city's total tax rate. Generally speaking, when we talk about the local taxing entities, when we talk about urban renewal areas, the local entities will still be able to collect various their debt service levies, as well as the school district will also receive its PEPL, and it's a secondary state levy as well from the development. So generally, the big one is usually this example, if the developer pays property taxes to the city and it generates $6.1 million in tax increment financing revenues, they would actually be paying over $7.2 million in property taxes to the city of Pella. This means that the city, school, and county over the next 20 years will receive $1.1 million in property taxes that they would not have otherwise received. Now, when you look at that, the reason why we're saying this, because when we talk about the Webster School site, which is the proposed development site this evening, Webster School property has been tax exempt since the 1950s. It's not paid any property taxes. So when we talk about redevelopment of this and rebating just TIF revenues on this, the local entities will still receive their debt service levies, and we believe that's going to be just over $1 million over the next 20 years as well. Those would be property taxes that they would not have otherwise received if it were not for this development. So let's go ahead, please, Greg. Now, one of the key components of the development agreement is the minimum tax assessment agreement. And now, as a part of this, the developer will be required to complete the minimum tax assessment agreement for the project. And what the agreement does is it establishes a taxable valuation for the project of just over $9 million. And when we look at taxable, that's the tax that the developer will actually be paying, or the property owner will actually be paying on the unit. The gross valuation on this is somewhere right around 16.5 million. The difference between the two is attributed to the residential rollback. Residential properties in Iowa are taxed about 55% of their total overall assessment on it. So doing the math, that equates to about $16.5 million. So what the minimum assessment agreement is, it starts off with just over $9 million. That's the taxable valuation based on 100% gross valuation of 16.5, and then increases on a 1.5% basis on an annual basis as well. Okay. The reason why this is necessary is it helps stabilize the TIF rebate schedule over the next 20 years, and also helps ensure the existing property tax level for the city of Pella as well. Let's go ahead, please, Corey. Now, as far as the term of the proposed development agreement, the term of the agreement is for up to 20 years for each phase of the development once the city certifies tax financing revenues for the property. At the latest, the agreement would terminate on December 31st, 2044. Let's go ahead, please, Corey. Now, as far as the concept plan for the agreement, this is actually Exhibit B1 in your agreement. This is one of the key cornerstone documents in the agreement. What this mandates is that the property must be developed in accordance with the plan that you see up here. So we have the residential development buildings right here, up here as well. So the development must be in accordance with this plan that we have as far as Exhibit B1. Well, let's go ahead, please, Corey. Now, as far as design requirements, actually, if we can go back to that site the concept plan again, overlook the key component. What the agreement states is that the concept of this development must be in the form of Exhibit B1. This does not negate the city's site planning process or any other development process that we would have as well. There'll be considerable more detail as far as the site planning process once the project would go through that as well. What this is just the overall concept plan and the layout plan for the development. And any development plan submitted to the city need to be in accordance with Exhibit B1, the development agreement. Let's go ahead, please, Corey. Now, as far as design requirements, these are actually further exhibits, Exhibit Bs in the agreement as well. The complex must be designed in accordance with the buildings that are noted in Exhibit B here. And we have pictures up here on the big board, and they're also included in the development agreement as well. Let's go ahead, please, Corey. Now, as far as completion dates and key dates under the development agreement, if council were to approve this agreement, demolition of the Webster School property would need to be completed by February 28, 2019. The developer would also be obligated to build approximately 831 million feet of sanitary sewer main. They need to get that project completed by August 31st. That project would be dedicated back to the city of Pella. The estimated cost of the new sewer main is right at $106,000. In addition, it's a significant date for the development as well. The first phase of the buildings need to be completed by March 31st, 2020. The second phase would be June 30th, 2021. One last fact that we'd like to put up is at this time, we're unaware of any other public infrastructure that would be required for development. So the sanitary sewer line that would be needed for the development would be built at the developer's expense, dedicated to the city of Pella. We're unaware of any other public infrastructure that is required for development as well. So let's go ahead, please, Corey. development. An example of an infill development was actually found in the comprehensive plan, located one block north of this site, approximately in this general area, but it was recommended in this general area for a signature mixed-use development or mixed-use residential development. So it very closely aligns with the city's comprehensive plan. We also believe from our perspective, it will eliminate blight in our community, in this case approximately 3 acres of blighted property within the community. We believe as far as the risk associated with the development, because everything's on a reimbursement basis and the developer will only receive grant revenue from the city of Pella, they pay property taxes to the city of Pella, that most of the financial risk of the development are transferred to development as well. In addition, we believe that there will be an incremental basis of property taxes received by the local taxing entities for their debt service levies. And this is significant when we talk about this particular property because the property has been tax exempt since the 1950s. And finally, we would just like to mention from staff's perspective that we believe a development of this size and magnitude and also this quality of housing that's being proposed for our community could lead to additional redevelopment in the southern portion of our community as well. So based on all of these reasons listed up here on the big board, we are recommending approval of the proposed development agreement this evening, Mr. Mayor. And we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that the mayor and council may have on the proposed agreement.
Thank you, Mike. Any written comments received?
No.
Any oral comments from council?
Michael, is there any ramifications if the minimum assessed value is not maintained
Well,
in the development agreement?
as far as the minimum tax assessment, the developer is obligated to sign that, the property owners are as well. And there's also certification that the tax assessor saying that they agree with that. And the county tax assessor has reviewed the agreement. They are in agreement with it. So from our standpoint, the minimum tax assessment is something, once it's initially approved by both the county assessor and all the parties, it's in place and it's established for the next 20 years. So there's a very high likelihood that the minimum tax assessment will be maintained. Now, from the city of Pella standpoint, to answer the larger question, the maximum cap on the development agreements is set at a point in time. If they don't pay property taxes equal to that total, they don't receive rebates back. So, you know, from our standpoint, the minimum tax assessment is something that's needed to stabilize the rebate schedules for the developers. Really doesn't have a lot of impact to the city of Pella. It's beneficial to us, but it's not one of the cornerstone of what we would view as one of the main benefits for us.
Right. It is to be part of the agreement though, and I just was wondering if there was any ramifications if it was not maintained.
Well, if it's not maintained on there, that would be something that would be against the assessor. And the assessor is obligated to do that. They've certified and they approve of it. And that's part of the requirements of the agreement. The Marion County assessor has reviewed this. So that's something we anticipate should not be an issue in the future.
I don't either, but I was just wondering. We've had that up there before, and I've often wondered if there was anything. Thank you.
Any other comments? I would just like to offer my support for this project. I think it's awesome. Can't wait to see groundbreaking get started out there and get moving forward. We're anxious to get it going and start filling some of those housing needs that we all know we have and we need to fill. So, any oral comments from members of the audience? Seeing none, do I hear a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Support Young and support Skivout. All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Skiba.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
Bachhoven.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Dan Stryland.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to 2B, resolution number 5929, entitled "A Resolution Ratifying, Confirming, and Approving Publication of Notice of Public Hearing and Approving and Authorizing Execution of a Development Agreement by and between the City of Pella and South Main One LLC." Mike, is there anything to add?
No, sir.
Do I hear a motion for approval?
So moved.
Bachhoven,
Support.
Vanderhorst. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Bachhoven.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Dan Stryland.
Yes.
Skiba.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to resolutions. Number one, resolution number 5930, entitled "A Resolution Approving and Authorizing Execution of a First Amendment to the Agreement for Private Development by and between the City of Pella and Boss Ridge LLC." Mike, if you'd explain, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to. And once again, I'd like to direct everyone's attention to the board to explain this item. As the mayor said this evening, what this resolution would do is approve the First Amendment to the city's agreement with Boss Ridge LLC. talking about Boss Ridge, just to orient everyone to the map up in the big board. T15 is located right here, Boss Longview Drive would be right down here. Holes number 4 and 5 of Boss Longview Golf Course are located right here. Boss Ridge Development is a 45-lot residential subdivision that was approved by the council in 2018. Now, the reason why this amendment is necessary is currently they're in Boss Ridge, or the developers of Boss Ridge are in the process of installing the infrastructure for the development, and they've ran into a few snags this year due to inclement weather. And what they're requesting is for the city to extend the completion date on installing those improvements from December 31st, 2018 to June 1st, 2019. But from city staff's perspective, we do not believe this is, we believe that due to this request, it's a very reasonable request due to the weather that was in place this year. And also with the need for housing with our community, we do not think that there's any negative ramifications for the city of Pella extending this deadline out to June 1st, 2019. So from our perspective, Mr. Mayor, we are recommending approval this evening, proposed amendment.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Do I hear a motion for approval?
So moved.
Support Doug. Support by Mr. Island. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Skiba. Dan Stryland.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Rockholden.
Yes.
Reindeerforst.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to item number 2, resolution number 5930, entitled a resolution approving the extension of a moratorium on the issuance of building permits for single or two-family new construction in the Oskaloosa Street corridor. Mike, can you explain it, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to. And as the mayor said, with this resolution, we effectively extend a moratorium on the construction of single-family and two-family homes in the Oskaloosa Street corridor. Now, to explain to council, initially this moratorium was in place on March 1st. It was established by the city council and actually expired on November 1st of this year as well. The reason for the moratorium was to give the city time to work through the Oskaloosa Street corridor plan that we're currently in the process of doing with it. That was the reasoning for this initially. Now, let's go ahead, please, for it. Now, as far as the moratorium and what we're requesting to extend it for this evening, is we're requesting the moratorium to be extended to November 1st, 2019. And the reasons for this is part of the Oskaloosa Street corridor that we're showing you up on the big board, which would be the geographical limits of the moratorium would be from the intersection of Main Street and Oskaloosa Street, and would actually extend out to Carson Street and Oskaloosa Street. The reason why we're asking for the moratorium is we believe we would be likely finishing up with the Oskaloosa Street corridor analysis in the next 60 days for council. In fact, there will be a proposed public input meeting, and actually there will be a public input meeting that will take place on January 24th, 2019 at this location. Very shortly afterwards, we'll be presenting this report to the mayor and council. Now, the reason why we're asking for the moratorium is a part of this analysis. When we look at the Oskaloosa Street corridor, there may be proposed zoning changes for the corridor. Again, if you look at the intention of the corridor was to develop strategies for recruiting additional commercial businesses along the corridor. As a part of this, there may be recommended zoning changes that may need to take place for council's consideration. In addition, if we're going to have strategies for recruiting additional businesses on this corridor, one of the important things to keep in mind is under Iowa law, before there can be any type of development agreements or incentives for businesses to relocate on the Oskaloosa Street corridor, we're going to need to establish an urban renewal area for this corridor. So looking at it from staff's perspective, if we're looking at zoning changes, potential zoning changes, we would say generally speaking, the rule of thumb is somewhere between 60 to 90 days for straightforward zoning changes. In this case, when you're talking about zoning changes that could be potential use changes along with other development-related changes, we would say that timeline really is somewhere between 60 to 150 days. When by the time you take into consideration work sessions at both the city council level and also the planning and zoning commission level. The urban renewal area or component of that is generally 60 to 90 days, but generally speaking, you wouldn't want to go into the urban renewal process until you discuss the zoning changes on it. So it's not something where we believe some of it can be done simultaneously. There may be some things that we need to sequence, particularly with the zoning changes on the front. So to give ourselves plenty of time to work through that on the back end, and council plenty of time to consider potential zoning changes as well as establishment of urban renewal area request you to extend the moratorium out to November 1st of 2019. This would only be for single-family or two-family homes built in the Oskaloosa Street corridor on Oskaloosa Street, extending from Main Street out to Carson Street. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, that concludes our presentation this evening. Before we have to Mr. Advisor,
Thank you, Mike. Do I hear a motion for approval?
So moved.
Randy Bush.
Support.
Support. Buckleman. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Reindeerhorst.
Yes.
Bachoven.
Yes.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Skibout.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to resolution number 5932, entitled Resolution Adopting the Downtown Streetscape Master Plan. Mike, if you explain, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to. With this, we have a very short presentation from staff's perspective, but we also have Mr. Pat Dunn from RDG that will be giving you a leading presentation this evening. I'd like to say just a few words on the proposed master plan that we're talking about this evening. First of all, I would like to thank the committee members that served on this committee. They've been working on this plan since late January, early February this year, and very diligently, I might add. When we take a look at the downtown master plan, I want council to keep a couple points in mind as we go through the presentation this evening. First of all, the reason why we're even proposing an overall master plan of streetscape design in the city's downtown. The reason why is we are planning some infrastructure upgrades in the city's central business district, and the infrastructure upgrades that we're talking about, or replacements, are due to aging infrastructure in the city's central business district. And when we talk about aging infrastructure specifically, I'm referring to the aging water mains and sanitary sewer mains in the city's central business district. Those mains are approaching 90 to 100 years of age, and they need replaced as part of it. Unfortunately, there's not a good way just to replace the water and sanitary sewer mains without replacing the streets in the downtown. When you replace the water and the sanitary sewer mains in the streets, naturally, another thing that's tied very closely to it is the sidewalk areas in the downtown. So with that, we believe that in the foreseeable future, there will be significant repairs and replacements or construction activity in the central business district. Before beginning this plan, the reason why the master plan was being proposed is this is really intended to be a concept plan, an overall design plan for the city of Pella. If we did not establish an overall plan before you started making infrastructure improvements in the downtown, every single project in the downtown, you would have debates on where are the trees going to be placed, what types of trees would you have in the downtown, should the streets be brick, should they not be brick, how maybe should the sidewalk areas be, and then as part of those projects, you'd want to solicit public input on it as well. So the idea of the plan this evening, what we've been working on almost for a whole year this year on this plan, is to actually revise the concept plan, take care of an overall unified street design plan, so we wouldn't have to repeat this process on every single project in the downtown. And the second thing that you're going to hear too this evening is there's been an extensive amount of public input received on this project as well. So the final point I would like to make before I turn the floor over to Mr. Pat Dunn is this is a recommendation from the steering committee that was approved by the Pella City Council on it. It is just a recommendation. Approval of the plan does not obligate the city to any of these projects that are mentioned in the plan this evening. And once again, this is an overall concept plan, and it's really intended to gain staff and council as we consider future projects in the city's central business district. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to go ahead and turn the floor to Mr. Pat Dunn of RDG.
Good evening and happy holidays to all of you. Pat Dunn with RDG Planning and Design. On behalf of our entire team, we're very thankful for allowing us the opportunity to help imagine Pella's downtown future and to help put together this guideline for the next 30 to 50 years. The intent tonight is to give you a brief overview of the report, the final report, give you the opportunity to stop me at any point throughout this presentation if you have questions, or for us to circle back after I walk you through the report, give you a general sense of the contents. So please don't hesitate to stop me at any point. This final streetscape report is broken down into 3 areas of focus. First is outlining and identifying the public engagement process that we've gone through. The second is the recommendations, and the third is the implementation, being the costs and the phasing. Again, on behalf of our team, everyone wanted me to say thank you for the opportunity. And again, the steering committee was very much in support of this project and this process. You see up on the screen here our original scope of services that outlines the series of things ranging from the project management to existing conditions and opportunities to some of the streetscape conceptual recommendations and designs and the infrastructure as well. You will notice on this page that we have identified the fact that the restroom facility conceptual design that was part of our process is not a part of this final recommendation. That has been purposefully separated from this streetscape master plan so that can be advanced in conjunction with other initiatives that are ongoing. So you won't see any final recommendations for the restroom in this document. But the process did happen, and it is part of the meeting minutes and part of part of the history of this process, and it can be advanced as you see fit. The scope of the project shown here in yellow ranges from primarily all the 6 block zones of downtown. And I am fast forwarding through a variety of these things. We have been in front of you before, so I don't want to belabor some of the things that you've already seen. Chapter 1, the public engagement process, and this was a robust, ranging from on-site, Thursdays in the park, to a variety of meetings in this room, a lot of good feedback, a lot of online feedback from the community, visual preferencing, visual listening, people giving us their ideas, thumbs up, thumbs down on a wide variety of different kinds of opportunities for the downtown area. Also captured within this report are comments that we received either online or through the process. Also had a design workshop that happened here in this room for a good solid 2 days. In addition to that, we also got on site and mocked up some of the streetscapes to make sure people had a comfort level with the feel and the dimensions that we were talking about. So on to the recommendations, chapter 2. To start off with, for the primary, there was 3 or 4 key questions that seemed to always come up as we were talking with the public or the steering committee. And those are listed here, and I'll go through them briefly one by one. The first question was, what is getting replaced? So on the left, you see the yellow identifying the streets primarily from storefront to storefront that would be replaced as a part of this overall project in a series of phases. And the blue or the cyan that would not necessarily because of recent replacements. Let me go back a second. The other question was, what streets will be brick? Again, the steering committee strongly supported the continued use of reclaimed pavers in the street itself along the center section of the streetscape. So you see there that the solid red would be the areas that would be ultimately new brick, new paver bricks in the street, and then you see the existing already in place to really complete that overall downtown. Other questions we received were what areas will be parking and how does it change from what exists today? So for all intents and purposes, the existing parking pattern will remain the way it is now with a few minor exceptions of some additional parking here. And as far as the quantity of parking, nearly all of the existing parking quantity will be replaced. 95% of what exists out there today will be replaced with new parking in the downtown area. You may ask, why is it not 100% or 110%? A lot of conversation about that at the steering committee level, and we'll talk about that. Part of the reason for that 5% reduction is related to safety, pedestrian safety. We identified on the left all of the areas circled in that light blue color that would actually be safer than they are today based on shortening the distance of pedestrian crossing. On average, shortening those distances from 45 to 30 feet. Another area of recent question from some of the steering committee and folks who've seen this draft report was, what about our parades, what about our floats, what about navigating these intersections with bump outs that maybe extend a little bit farther than they are today. So we did go ahead and we ran several different turning movements with computer software to simulate that, and in all three different scenarios, it did successfully allow for the floats to navigate those new geometries. A little bit more about what it would look like today versus in the future. This is an existing photo, and if you look at that existing photo superimposed with the new proposed streetscape, three things to focus on. First, the pedestrian safety with the bump outs and the enhanced crossings, both at mid-block and at the corners. Second would be much more strategic tree placement and species selection. And then lastly, to enliven the sidewalk with a variety of things ranging from site furniture, hanging baskets, planters, bistro tables, bike racks, street furniture. A lot of conversation about trees. With the new, as you can imagine, tearing out storefront to storefront means all the trees will be removed that are currently there. The lindens will go away. So what do we want to put back and how many and where? All of those things are a part of the recommendation, and key to those recommendations. Bottom line, we're recommending less trees, less quantity of trees. We're recommending better, in our opinion, better species selection that gives you a higher canopy, gives you a smaller leaf size, and also positioning those trees where they're less likely to impact business owner signage and some other key visual elements of the downtown. The paving system, again, lots of comments about slippery or tough to shovel, just a lot of challenges. So a part of the recommendation, not only in the street with reclaimed pavers, but in the sidewalk, it is recommended to come back in with a unit paving system. It may or may not be brick, it could be concrete, but those pavers would have to meet certain ASTM requirements for friction coefficient that would be significantly better than what's out there today, improving safety and slip hazards. And then also the recommendation includes minimizing the different materials that exist out there. So every time you go from a paver to a concrete, cast in place concrete, you've got the potential for different trip hazards and for slightly different elevations. By sticking more with a uniform paver, but just simply changing the color of the paver, that significantly minimizes that trip hazard by lessening the change in material. So that's part of the recommendation. The lighting system, period style, similar to what's out there today, and the look and the feel is what was recommended and endorsed by the steering committee. Although today's technology, as you all know, is significantly more improved with LED lighting, full cutoff, house shields for upper level restriction of light in the upper levels of buildings. So all of that good practice that is just part of a downtown relighting is part of this report and recommendation. Street furniture, period style, all of the donor benches that exist out there today would remain and still have a place where they are today in the new system, and additional site furniture ranging from benches to litter receptacles, bike racks, cafe seating would all be in keeping with those existing donor benches and fit with those as those being a foundation of what's out there today. Also, the recommendation is to continue to try to green up the downtown by providing at-grade planters could have railings, could be slightly curved around them. Some of the details need to still be figured out, as would always be the case at this level of design. But the bottom line is to green up and get some more life and color and vitality to that streetscape. As Mike mentioned, the genesis and the purpose and the reason why much of this is being proposed today is because of the 100-year-old infrastructure that needs to be replaced. So without getting into the specifics, Jack Pope with Garden & Associates was part of our team and helped work with city staff to develop the recommendations on what exactly all those utilities that need to be replaced and where they would go and ultimately the cost. Another part of the recommendation is for pedestrian wayfinding area. Big picture is the recommendation is to phase out the existing pedestrian wayfinding, which you see here on the screen, and to replace that with a primary and a secondary system that we'd like to share. The existing system has served a great need and been very functional for many years. At this point, it is our recommendation to replace those for a variety of reasons. Some of it relates to new technology, some of it relates to the feedback we got from the public and the steering committee. The primary system, 6 locations are identified for kiosks, period-style kiosks that would look similar to what's shown on the left. Exact style and model has not been selected, but various options would exist. And those primary kiosks would be, and they're located in high traffic pedestrian areas. They would be comprised of Pella's logo or a refinement of that logo that may be more appropriate and more visible and better contrast. So an evolution of the logo may want to happen at the top of these. And then the body and the primary purpose of this would be to have a graphic map of the downtown area and have all the destinations all the possible destinations categorized in different ways, from businesses to civic, et cetera. And the beauty of this kind of a system is that these, every 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever the city would like, these can be replaced. So as a new business comes in or changes happen, these aren't static for years and years and years. They can be, the graphics can be replaced at a fairly economical rate. The second part of the wayfinding is what we're calling the secondary system, and it's really built on this concept of find, learn, shop. It is much more than a wayfinding only. It is very much based on what we use today to navigate in so much of our lives. It is mobile focused, and what you see on the screen here and the graphic and the plan on the right shows potential locations for what we're calling these reminder signs, relatively small signs that would simply remind people that there is a system in place, there is a way to use your own device to again, find, learn, and shop. It's much more than you might think of an app or something. It's actually being deployed in many communities, and it uses smaller devices around the downtown to help with where you are, context and proximity. And ultimately what it does is, beyond just simple navigation, it allows for 2 key areas of enhancement. One would be for visually impaired and some of your challenged population and visitors, that this can help them navigate because it knows exactly where they are and can partner with civic and city functions. Equally important is the ability for this to partner with businesses, so that all of the business, it can be a way of improving and advertising and allowing businesses to integrate with the system and give people the ability to understand where the businesses are in specials and sales, et cetera. The last few things I'll mention tonight would be a couple key areas of focus that were requested as a part of the steering committee and the work sessions in the public. Number one was the Molengrad, and how could we make adjustments to the streetscape, the public realm, that can help that development, primarily from a pedestrian movement standpoint. So you see here, the desire was really to get that southern loop to allow and to encourage people, instead of walking just from Franklin, from the mill to the park, to take that southern loop, and for people driving by to not just simply drive by, to understand there's something there. So we conceptualized ways to take that western entrance to the Molengrad on Main and align the pedestrian, number one, align the pedestrian crossing at that location, shifting it from the alley south slightly, but also looking at ways to enhance that and make it more visually appealing and more obvious that there's something significant there. A series of examples are included that are simply provided to prompt ideas and as potential examples of how things could happen there that would be a part of Pella's context and history and the Molengrad itself that could draw people in. Another area of focus was there's 3 alleys as a part of the downtown, 2 primarily that need to be reconstructed with infrastructure changes and utilities. So the question is, what do we do with those alleys different than they are now? They're they're semi-pedestrian, semi-vehicular. They have to serve both needs. So what can we do to accommodate both the vehicular and the pedestrian needs? First thing primary recommendation is to partner with the public, the owners of those buildings, to develop a mural program that you see examples of here. This is not a recommendation for a specific mural, but simply to take the walls of those alleys and breathe life into those walls by working with the private property owners. And this has been done in a wide variety of communities, small and large. And there's some examples in the report. Here's some before and after showing those 3 alleys and how that, just some simple things could be done. In addition to the enlivening of the walls themselves, lighting is key to making those feel safe and pedestrian friendly. So the integration of suspended or catenary lighting system within those alleys, which has been done in some examples shown, could really make those feel like a place you want to be in a pedestrian zone. Final thing tonight would be to just talk a little bit about implementation and costs. What's shown here on this is a color-coded phasing, recommending 8 different phases, 4 of which are tied to dates, and the relative costs for each one of those phases shown, starting with the alley work in the north to Franklin primarily being one of the key 2nd and 3rd phases, and then ultimately Main, and et cetera, et cetera. So those first 4 phases are in that $10.5 million range, with the remaining phases maxing out or getting us to that $16.5 to $17 million range. Hopefully that gives you a sense of the overall report. I'd love to entertain and help clarify any questions you may have.
Pat, do you think our public input was substantial?
Absolutely.
For this?
Absolutely.
We had good public input?
Yeah, there's a variety of ways that we've measured and we could give you feedback on, for example, the quantity of people that responded to our online surveys.
What was done with that information? How was that handled?
The online visual listening?
All of the public input, how was that handled?
Well, some of it was handled by giving that feedback to the steering committee and tying it to the recommendations as we moved through the process. Other stuff was immediately used. For example, when we were here for 2 days and we had people coming in both days, in some cases literally helping us draw and saying, no, don't do that. So some of it was absolutely directly resulting in some of these.
Was that on that thumbs up and thumbs down thing? Is that what was used for the public input?
That was one tool, yes, to
Yeah.
say, do you like this, do you don't like that? So that's a very easy way for the people in the public to respond to things.
Okay, but there was just, indeed, that is an easy way, but it doesn't really open it up for, a defined parameter is given to them, which one do you like best? Was there any like charrette where they can really get some input? Quite frankly, and I find this ordinary. I think we had some good opportunities, as you know, we're sending 16 plus 17 million bucks. And that's what I was after is, was there out of the box thinking on this? Was, you know, losing, what was there, 12, 15 parking spots?
24.
I got a heartache with that. I mean, it's a critical thing. I got a heartache. Another thing, I got a problem with staging. The alley, I love stage one, and I'm just giving my feedback. You guys are asking for feedback, and I'm giving it. Stage one is perfect. That needs it bad. That other alley should be stage two, in my opinion. That needs to be taken care of. That needs to be cleaned up. That would be a very good place to start. I think it's prime for it. Let's do it where it's needed. Infrastructure is a deteriorative thing. It, in time, takes its toll. When it's shot, yes, we do have to replace it. That's alleyway is shot, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I was, go ahead. I look around at other communities, you know, like Washington Street, Main Street. I look at other communities. Highway 146 in Grinnell, when they redid their town, they did not brick major highways. Business 92 in Knoxville, they did not mess with brick in those streets. I don't like the idea of bricking Washington. I do not like the idea of bricking Main Street. You know, I'm very opposed to that. And I think we really have to look at, okay, where do we really have sewer problems? Where do we really have, water problems? You know, and if we need to dig up our streets because we have problems, you know, then maybe we start there. But I'm not for, digging up those streets, you know, and breaking them right now, digging them up next year if we don't have problems. I think it has to be a step-by-step solution. But I'd look at Washington Street, I don't wanna break it. I look at Main Street, I don't wanna break it. Parking spaces, if we don't have pedestrian, problems, I don't wanna eliminate, parking spaces there. And I get this complaint from, people around town, all the time. I do like the idea of fewer trees. I go around, European towns, they've eliminated many of their trees. They've gone more to like, potted plants type of thing, you know, as opposed to our, even linden trees, which, you know, can be trimmed, quickly. But there are many of these concepts, quite frankly, I'm not too crazy about. And spending, you know, the 16, 17 million, man, have I gotten pushback from people around town, and I was elected by taxpayers. I was not, elected by RDG.
As I looked at the plan, I mean, it felt to me like, and there's some cool things in there. I like the jet outs of the public crossings and some of those kind of things. I kind of felt like one thing was that this plan was more of a all-inclusive than an a la carte, and I feel like there's some things in there that we probably should do. But I struggle with 17 million bucks when probably 6 times a year I get called from people that live by the indoor pool when their sewer's backed up in their basement, which has been something that we've been talking about since I was on council the first time and haven't fixed yet. So I struggle justifying spending this kind of money. Danny, my question for you would be, are the water and sewer under the streets?
No, now the brown 2 blocks of Main, no, there's a little bit of sanitary on the south half, the south block. The 2 main blocks of Franklin, there is no sanitary sewer.
So-
On the east block of Franklin, that's something we put it in the plan to be replaced, thinking by the time we get to it, it probably will need to be replaced. Now, sometimes the main line, you heard me talk a lot about the lining, does a lot of good, that's only the main line. So when we have a sewer that's 100 years old, or 120, some of this,
Yeah.
the services need replaced too, or all of a sudden, you'll have 20 holes over the next.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to replacing the aging sewer because I understand that part of it. I was more concerned about if the sewer and water is not underneath of those streets, I have a hard time busting them up when there's other places in town that we need to be fixing streets.
That same group of streets, just about every one of them does have water that's in excess of 100 years old.
Yep.
However, it's the old, the different kind of cast iron, lead joint, but it's rock
Sure.
solid. We haven't had a lot of breaks, but there again, you get back to the services, there's been service problems over the years.
But it's not under the street. That was my
A lot of
first-
those are out under the edge,
Okay.
gutter line, parking areas.
So on the curb.
Yep.
The other thing that probably bothers me more than anything is the number one topic when you talk to business people downtown is parking. And we spent a ton of money on a revitalization plan that doesn't address our parking issue. It takes away 24 parking spots. And it blows me away that we would spend money on a plan like this and not improve our parking situation. We've done nothing to improve that. So, you know, I struggle supporting all of these other things when the major things that we need to fix aren't addressed. I'll stop there.
I'll go
Uh,
next, if I may.
Go ahead.
I'd love to. It's right on the tip of my tongue.
Nope.
So,
That'll work.
I agree with every point that the gentleman prior to me made, but I'd also like to just point out a few things. I could tell every time you had an input meeting, and the way I could tell it was because there was a beeline down to our business with individuals that felt that when they had pushback and they had concern and they wanted to address the same concerns that these individuals just pointed out, that was squelched. So they went straight to their city councilwoman, and I was more than happy to hear. So to me, when you have an input meeting, it's as important to hear the negatives as the positives and give those individuals at that meeting an opportunity to say why. Secondly, I would like to say that all of us sitting up here, all of us, we elected officials, we have an obligation that is quite extreme, and it's one that I know that we all take very seriously. So when I see needs as opposed to wants, I am well aware we need our sewers repaired, imperative. And there are many things on this list that we do indeed need. And there are many things throughout our community that we need. And that for us is called fiduciary responsibility. And it's something that when I look at this and I look at the phasal system within this plan, it doesn't allow me to do that. And it doesn't allow the rest of us to use that and take this public money and put it where it's needed for the things that are needed. So I agree, I'm not blown away by it. There are some great things, but there isn't anything that I say, yes, to voice my ward's vote, I'm completely behind. In fact, I'm a little befuddled, and I also want to say that I look at it and I think it further segregates our business community. It doesn't join our business community, it further segregates our business community to the west, our business community to the south, which is a historical problem, which I do think needs to be addressed. And if we're going to spend $17 million, I think it ought to be an asset to the entirety of our business community. Did you want to go next?
I was waiting.
Proceed.
I felt cautious.
Called dominoes.
I think the plan has wonderful pieces to it. I think the streets need to be redone just for the infrastructure. Whether it's broken now or not, it's going to break soon. If it's 120 years, are we going to then dig it up piecemeal? Or are we going to do the project all at once? That's a major concern, the infrastructure. And while the streets are being dug up to fix that major problem that may be in the near future, let's do something special about it. And I think the street designs that you have, Pat, and with the committee, which I want to also affirm, a committee of citizens made this decision. It's just not RDG. I think the changes you made to it, I think, are good additions. It brings it up to more contemporary, and I think will be much more appealing for our city. I agree about Main Street and Washington. Maybe they aren't well suited for brick. I question that because of the heavy traffic, farm equipment, spring and summer. It's busy on those streets with heavy equipment. So I'm concerned. And I must say my concern is the brick going to stand up as opposed to concrete? So I think the money that is down for street repairs, infrastructure, which is the first 4 years, is not to the 17 million that we're talking about. It's 10 million. I think the TBA, the 5 through 8, that's up in the air. I'm more concerned in the next 4 years we take care of our streets and the infrastructure that's down there. So you may see 17 million, but it's not 17 million yet. And that I want us to be aware of. It's more 11 million. And it's more about infrastructure that is really past their life, I would think, Denny. Is that true? That we've been lucky to have 100 years?
There's some of those water mains we believe date back to 1896.
100 year plus. So that's my concern. Yeah, we can wait, but then we're doing it piecemeal. We're doing it piecemeal. My concern, well, my other question, Pat, is when you talk about sidewalks, are you including all the streets that are up there being rebuilt? My main concern is Central Park. Are you going to put in the panels along those sidewalks to Central Park as well?
No.
You were talking about pavers for their sidewalk.
Correct. The sidewalks around Central Park would remain as, most of those would remain as is, as a part of this project, concrete sidewalks. They're separated from, if you recall, they have a distance away from the paving, so much of those would be able to be maintained as is.
How about Liberty Street? And the Phase 3 streets there. First, I think it's first. No, it's not first, it's second, I believe. The ones in yellow. Are those sidewalks going to be with pavers as well?
No. It's a valid question. We illustrated on this, I showed you tonight, one section of sidewalk that would be a brick or a unit paver. That doesn't mean every sidewalk in the entire downtown would be that way. There would be in the high traffic in the core, for example, on Franklin, that's what's recommended. But in the other areas, East Second, for example, that would be a standard concrete.
The concrete, okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Now, you're not using real brick anymore. You're using a paver brick that won't be slippery. Because you're talking about safety with, mid-block crossings. Brick as it now is not a safety, is not safe. traditional clay brick.
If, if a traditional clay paver can meet the ASTM standards for slip coefficient, then that's a valid product to use. It can be made out of clay, it can be made out of concrete, it can even be made out of asphalt. Unit paving systems have a variety of, it's really all about getting to the requirements and the standards for slip resistance. So all of those would be options and competitively bid those options.
Because right now, our brick is downright dangerous, and not just for us old people.
Mark?
A couple of things. I'm pretty much on board with Larry. We've got infrastructure that has to be addressed. We better get on with it. I have been in communities that have installed the kind of crosswalk system that's being proposed. It's wonderful. I shudder driving through town. People in Pella do not give crosswalks. They just don't. That would be a significant improvement. I too have had doubts all along about brick on some of these main streets. I just don't know how practical it actually is for public works to maintain long-term traffic. Yeah, in general, now parking, yeah, we're gonna lose some, but I view parking as an additional issue. We've got to come up with parking solutions, whether we go forward with something like this or not.
Right. I agree, Mark. We've never resolved, we haven't had any time to really talk about options in that regard. And yeah, I'm not happy about losing 24 spaces, but you know, it's a bigger issue than losing 24 spaces. I am not. Yeah. We need to sit down and really hash that out.
Look, if I may, I'd like to weigh in because I was the chair of the committee, so there's a couple of points that I'd like to make on this whole process. And this is not an RGD plan. This is a community input crafted plan at the direction of all of the people that participated in those surveys, as well as all of the people on the committee from all the different organizations. So this is not necessarily their plan, this is our plan, and we did seek a tremendous amount of input with open doors, with pup tents or pop-up tents, and all kinds of different things. So I take a bit of an exception to call it an RDG plan, because we did all have input. If they didn't have input, they chose not to have input in it, because there were plenty of opportunities. That being said, it is a plan. There's nothing here that says we are forced to spend 1.3 million, or 2.59 million, or 2.86, or the grand total of 16.62. This is simply a roadmap that says, as a group, from a cafeteria standpoint, here are all of our options, and if we chose them all in this timeline, we would expect to spend 16.62. There's no decisions based in here other than what does the future look like for us? And if we disagree, that's completely up to us. And that's the beauty of this whole process. And that's why these guys were brought in to say, let's create this opportunity to have the community provide the input so that we don't have breaks that we have to repair piecemeal and end up in 20 years or in TBD number 4, and all of a sudden we don't have a plan, we still got a whole bunch of patches throughout the entire community and no concerted, no coordinated, no real look or identity. That was the goal of this whole process. So, I mean, I totally understand there's nobody more concerned about the budget and the spending than I do, than me. As far as the brick streets on some of those main ways, I totally agree with you. I'm not 100% convinced of the brick on those streets either. But in the defense, that's also part of our Back to Brick program that we all voted on at one time or another, and said these are all the streets that we choose to put bricks on. So that's where that came from with a lot of this in this plan. In fact, we reduced the number of bricks that would be included here because we said the parking areas would not be brick. that would all be poured concrete. The only portion of the brick would be the thoroughfare, the main part. Now, I'm not disputing any of the points. In fact, I agree with an awful lot of the points that you're making here, other than to say, if you don't plan for, and yes, replace some aging infrastructure that may still be serviceable for a few more years, and you roll that dice, and in January, you lose your water main because it's 110 years old, you're gonna spend a heck of a lot more money to fix it than you would to probably do the whole city block under a planned investment. And those are the kind of things that, as we said, is part of our fiduciary responsibility, not only to spend wisely, but also to plan wisely. And on that, I will pass the baton on.
So let me ask, we're talking about 16.6 total, and I guess I apologize because part of this, what we are voting on tonight, was year 19, year 20, year 20, and 22, 21 and 22. That is indeed on what we have on the agenda to vote for. I wish that was canceled. That would have made me feel a little bit better because it is written as such that that is part of what we're voting for. Anyhow, if we spend $17 million, you say parking is a whole nother issue. When are we gonna address parking?
Sure.
If we're doing a complete downtown streetscape, and this doesn't prompt an open discussion about parking, what is?
I think.
What are we gonna do? I mean, all I want is, and I understand that this is a master plan. We have to have, when we proceed, we need a blueprint to go by. I understand that. I'm well aware of that, and I don't have a problem with that. I just think it is an ordinary plan. We are not addressing problems in the community. You talk about infrastructure problems. Go out that people are riding gravel roads to city streets. Go out where there's stormwater issues. Go out where there's sewer backed up. That's infrastructure problems. And we're spending 17 million here? That's where I'm really struggling with this, Jim.
Let me just respond to Bruce. This plan doesn't address parking. I totally agree, Bruce. Parking is bigger than this area here because we have parking in this area now that's not sufficient. And we can't add parking along these streets. We need to look at how else we're gonna deal with parking other than these streets that we're talking about tonight. We need areas, and we don't have areas available on these streets. Parking is, my question is, why haven't we already solved it? You know, here we are, this is my 7th year, ending my 7th year. It's been here for the last 7 years.
I'm at 18, Larry, and nothing is done. And
Well,
we can't address parking when we do this kind of redo of our downtown, and we're taking away parking spaces. When is it gonna happen?
I agree with what you're saying.
Why couldn't we at
That I
least
think,
have a discussion?
that is an issue we need to resolve, Bruce. We need to stop talking about it and do something about
Well,
it.
maybe so. I hope so.
The people that,
I think Mike has some information
Yeah,
that might help us.
Can I also clarify this? I'm gonna try to pick off each one of these at a time and really get down to, Corey, if we could go to page 84, please. Slide 84. It's in our presentation. This is a recommendation. When we put the steering committee together, take off some of these, we put a volunteer group together that was representative members in the community. This is a recommendation tonight. It's a concept plan. Nothing obligates the city council to spend $17 million to do a single project in this on here. Main reason it was due is because of infrastructure. Infrastructure that we're talking about, the water and the sewer mains, it's a little like going to the dentist. You need that, you might be able to put it off a little bit of time, but in reality, what you're talking about is when it's gonna be done and how much it's gonna cost and what the pain's gonna be at the time. not a question if we're gonna be replacing 90 and 100-year-old water mains, it's when we replace the water mains and what needs to happen. Corey, let's go to slide 94. This plan was put together by city staff on the phasing plan. This is what we view needs to be done probably relatively in the near future. This was our phasing plan that came from city staff to the steering committee. Very first project out of the gate was 2019, the Osport alleyway project. That's because the sanitary sewer line back there needed replaced, the water main needed replaced. In addition, the downtown Latic storm sewer. This was the very first project out of the gate. The rest of this is somewhat debatable on what needs to happen. One of the questions I asked, well, what about the Main Street alleyway or the old City of Hall alleyway? Our thoughts in working through the logistics on it is we think that this alleyway project would need to be replaced at the same time as Main Street because you need a place to stage construction equipment as you replace that alley on here. So we had it lumped in with Main Street. If council wants to replace Main Street and do the old City Hall alleyway project earlier, that's the decision of the council. Now, let's answer the question. When are we going to discuss these things? What we are planning on doing is this upcoming budget session is talking about the Osport alleyway project and starting that actually after TULIP time, as well as the phasing plan for the rest of this. Now, when we talk about objects such as issues such as parking, it was never the charge of the committee to look at parking or to come up with a parking master plan or add additional parking in here. What the committee's charge was, Corey, I believe, was 41. If you could just this slide in mind right here. Corey, let's jump back to slide number 41. Committee's charge is we go into each individual street project. What we're really concerned about was the sidewalk areas right up here. What are they going to look like? What types of tree species are we going to do? What are the tree plantings up here? What are the crosswalk areas up there? We wanted to have some sort of basis to start off our design for discussion purposes that we can present to city council. If you take that initial concept that we would start up to, and Corey, let's go back to slide 94, just so everybody's clear on this one. Each one of these projects would be an individual project up for an individual vote presented to the city council. So if we're going to talk about 2020, it would be this next budget year cycle that Franklin Street would be proposed. At that time, the budget discussions would start with the project on there. You talk about the financing, where the financing for the project would be, how would we go about it, the timing, what we would have to do with parking on it, and that's when the discussion would start. We visualize when you're talking about making these changes, issues such as parking would just naturally evolve out of it. So what we have is a concept plan put together by a volunteer group of representatives in the community for council's consideration. It is completely up to the city council on what gets done, when it gets done, and how much it costs. That's all we are looking for, was just something to start off with, and that's slide 41. And what we are concerned about was the sidewalk areas and having some sort of initial design to start with for discussion purposes of the city council and something that would get public input. It was never the charge of the committee to look at parking or a parking master plan put together or adding additional parking in the downtown. We envisioned that, and we thought that that would be something that would be delegated to city staff and city council and outside the committee's charge. But that was not included in it, based on my memory in the consultant's scope of services. So that's just the point of clarification.
Where did that charge come from, Michael? I mean,
That came from the city council when we approved the RDG's contract and assigned.
Right, but to the committee and stuff. If it did, then that was a severe oversight on our part by not looking at the parking. Because I just think, and, you know, I do understand that this is a blueprint. And I'm not, we are asking for our input, and I'm also had quite a few people. I'm trying to be a representative here of some constituents, okay? So, but I do think that we need to get that addressed.
That would be something that I would look at. If it's an issue of parking before we start the project, this would be something that we would discuss initially during the budget cycle, and before we authorize going down to Franklin Street or Main Street or this section of Franklin Street, let's have a plan in place for parking before you start it on that. But that's something that we envision would be delegated by the city council to city staff on it. In fact, we talked about this issue, I believe, during our last work session that we had on December 11th with the Osport alleyway project and the impact on parking up here. And we actually talked about the need and elimination of parking for this, not the elimination, but the phasing, the removal of parking up here.
Right.
That was discussed during December 11th. And it's on our to-do list to talk during our January work session.
And I don't wanna stop what we have planned for in 2011. That's not my agenda, because that needs it bad. But can we get parking on an agenda sometime, that we can start looking at it and dealing with it? And, you know, there's so, it's always such a hindrance.
And to be clear, even as a participant of the committee, when we originally, or when the original plan came out, there were even less parking spots. We pushed back at that point and said, there's no way, absolutely no way, and Mark was there too, where we discussed that and said there's absolutely no way that no one would accept. And as I recall, what was it, 60 parking spots, 63 parking spots initially that was gonna go away? And we said, absolutely not, there is no way. I mean, that was obviously off the scale, but, you know, from a purely design standpoint, it was a beautiful design, but we weren't willing to give that up, even recommend it.
See, and that would, I'd love to have seen that design, because quite frankly, I've done a lot of traveling. This is ordinary. Not meaning this in any negative sense, but this is an ordinary thing you can go to, John. I was hoping more for a little forward thinking. You go around and you look. Why couldn't we have a roundabout where the Tulip Tower is? That we're incorporating that whole block down there? Put a roundabout. Was that ever even considered? Was that ever even talked about? Was that ever even thought?
Did I answer the question on that?
Yeah.
Pat, based off my memory on public input, when you solicited public input, what was reported back to the steering committee, if I remember correctly, is people were happy with the way the downtown looked currently. So a lot of the things that came out of the recommendation, I believe, from the public input, was there was a lot of similar concepts that people were in favor of during the thumbs up, thumbs down, that were present in the downtown streetscape. So the recommendation carries over a lot of things that are in existence today.
But my point, Michael, is if you think out of the box, how many people would have said, yeah, you know, that would make that a nice area by the historical, by the windmill, it's on a major intersection, you could have put one in there, and I'm not advocating that. But that's the kind of out-of-box thinking that I was hoping for, and if we could have done that, and public could have gotten input on that, there's no additional cost, that's not a costly thing.
We did. What was discussed, if I believe correctly, Mayor and Mark and Pat, the discussion was on one-way streets in the downtown, potentially expanding sidewalk areas out there in the future, and that's where the committee focused on that, not necessarily roundabouts in the downtown, but
Well,
one-way
one-way
streets.
streets, that would be a disaster.
Yeah.
Especially in a community our small, our size, but.
It would have been a solution to expanding sidewalks.
Right.
Yeah, right. Right now, our sidewalks aren't expanded basically at all in Franklin, are they?
Yeah.
Somewhat.
1 foot,
They
2
do
foot?
1 foot on each side? Is that what
1
it is?
foot on each side.
Foot and a half for each.
Foot and a half.
You know, I looked on these drawings here, and those tables, when they're drawn in there along the curb, they look real nice. But it's not reality. In my mind, that sidewalk is too narrow to really accommodate street vending and dining. I just, you know, especially on a busy Thursday night or Friday night.
Well,
Plus,
and
it's out by the curb, right? So everybody that's gonna eat out there or whatever, they're hauling it all the way across the, I'm not trying to be,
no, but those are.
I'm not trying to be negative here, guys. I'm just trying to be realistic.
Right,
So,
no, and I can speak to at least a piece of that, Tony, and then I'll
Yeah, that's fine.
throw it back to
Yep.
you. And I'll just speak to the one piece, one of the things that we considered as part of the committee was, you know, how wide is the right of way in the middle that we need? And can we then carve out the rest of that right of way and add it back to the sidewalk to provide that area? I mean, we're just talking about losing parking spots. The more we carve out of the street, the less angled those parking spots become, and then the fewer parking spots you get. That's where the net result is of the loss of a lot of those parking spots. Now, that being said, we said, okay, you know what, 2 lanes was, 40 feet or 45 feet or whatever. This is actually wider than that, and the reason for that is so that you can still take that center lane and the guys can make their deliveries to all those stores on Main Street and still have traffic go by each side, because you don't want those trucks going up and down that alleyway, right?
Right.
So where's our solution? You only got so much that you can't move the buildings. Those, there are certain things that we absolutely had to anchor.
Here's another out-of-the-box thought.
Go for it.
Why don't you close Franklin, make it a pedestrian, and put up a parking lot or a parking, right where the livery is or something like that? I know this is out, but that's the kind of thinking I think that we need. We need to look long-term and try and develop something. I mean, I have been in a lot of towns, and that is what they have. And you can still have your delivery trucks run right down the middle, but you've got this pedestrian traffic. You could still have a parade go through there. At least give it some thought, at least look at it, at least open it up to the public. You know, it's just like we got something canned, and it's just ordinary.
Still need a parking.
I'm gonna step off my soapbox now, guys. I really, I
Hey,
say,
it's all good input.
yeah, I
You know,
say this, and with a love for this community. That's where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to be critical here. I just want us to address some issues that have been pending with us for a while.
Tony?
I'll be quiet.
I don't want anybody to think that anybody up here doesn't value the importance of replacing 100-year-old infrastructure. I don't think anybody said that. But what we've asked our community to give us feedback on is a downtown revitalization project, not an infrastructure project that's $10 million. We put out a downtown revitalization project for $17 million. That's what we ask people to talk to us about. That's what people call me about. That's what people stop me in the coffee shop about, is why are we spending $17 million? And I start down the path of all this infrastructure, and they look at me like I'm lying straight to their face. Because we're not talking about infrastructure. If it's about infrastructure, well, let's have an infrastructure plan. And then let's put this on the shelf with all the other plans that we pay for and don't put to use. We talk about that Useport Alley, and we talk about the drainage, and we talk about parking. We ought to be talking about parking right now with that, because guess what? Has anybody talked about when we put those underground storage tanks there and we stack a parking ramp on top of it? Nobody's talked about that. What's going to happen? We're going to put those tanks in the ground, and in 12 months we're going to come back and say, man, sure wish we'd have thought about that parking ramp there. We should have planned for that.
Right.
Now, if somebody's planning for that, then they need to speak up right now and tell me, because I have not been made aware of that. But that's the kind of concerns that people that are going to pay for this $10.2 million project, that's what they're calling me concerned about. They're scared to death that we're going to spend $17 million on something that isn't necessary, and when we start talking about infrastructure, they don't believe it, because that's not the plan we put in front of them.
The plan's called a streetscape Pella downtown streetscape plan. What does the word streetscape mean? Pretty. It's jewelry. And I agree with Tony. I get the same thing. I have learned more about sewers in the last 30 days. I'm pretty darn proud of myself. I know about inflow, I know about output, I know what street, Franklin Street, it's based on a certain kind of rock, but you talk to the people, they have no clue. They don't, because they were asked to choose benches and chairs and street signs. And so in their mind, we're spending a lot of money on a lot of jewelry right now. It's extremely hard as their representative to say, whoa, wait. Well, wait, when the very nature of the presentation is called a streetscape. So maybe we need to start again. I don't know. I love the idea of new sewers. I think it's great. And I could talk sewers all night long now. And probably makes a little bit of sense. So.
All right, any other comments?
I have just one.
Okay.
What did that study cost us? Remember?
That's, RDG,
74? Something we need to keep in mind.
You know, I have one final comment. I think some of the issues that this streetscape talks about, we've always talked about, or I've heard anyway from people on the business side on those streets, trees are a problem. This addresses that. This addresses the sidewalk issue. This deals with that. Deals with people wanting to have something different with safety. This talks about that. Talks about, what about the issue of dining outside? More and more businesses down there have said that's what they desire. So to hear that this doesn't talk about changes and being creative, it may not talk enough, but it certainly addresses those 4 issues. And I think we need to be mindful that this plan is a streetscape plan as well as infrastructure. And I don't think we're giving the credit to the plan that was developed at our request that names at least 4, and I can probably go down a few more. So I want you to be mindful that this is a streetscape plan, it's just not infrastructure.
I would agree with that, Larry. The one thing that I would want to point out is, you know, of that $17 million, it's not all fluff, even though it doesn't say infrastructure in the title of the streetscape. Maybe that, you know, that was a miss on our part. Maybe it should say, you know, long-term infrastructure and public enhancement, or something to that regard. Maybe it shouldn't have been called the streetscape, but I don't think you can discount the value of seeking the public input, getting all of that information, and creating those plans. I understand the frustration with the parking. I'm just as frustrated as the rest of us. I mean, I've been at this now almost 16 years, and it's been there since the very first day we've talked about it. And to be honest, we've had, on occasion, an opportunity or two to solve some of those problems. And past councils and members of this group have chosen not to pursue those solutions. So to throw this out because it doesn't solve those solutions without also honoring past decisions is not necessarily giving the public the full picture. Now, that being said, do I have more comment? I don't want to close up.
No, I'll just leave my comments alone, but I just want to make sure council's aware when you talk about these projects. Before you can start planning on the projects, you got to plan for the sidewalk areas and the specifics on it. So if this plan is not adequate, that's going to have to be done again at some point in time. I just want to make sure you're aware of that.
Okay, any other comments?
There is opportunity to make changes. You know, that's the big thing. This isn't
Yep, there's no,
100% done deal.
Plan, a
Yeah.
concept,
Right.
timeline is flexible.
Hey, we've changed one thing already, there's no more restroom.
I just feel like there's
It's
enough,
wide open.
Meeting
there's
adjourned.
enough discrepancy in this plan, I don't know how we can sit here and support it.
okay, well, you'll have your opportunity maybe in a moment if we. That's a great leadway right into, do I hear a motion for approval?
Sure.
Young,
And I'll support it.
support Steve out. I hesitate to ask, is there any additional discussion?
I would just add that, you and I were both on that steering committee, and a lot of good, sharp people, did what we were asked to do. And, was the right question asked? Maybe not. But we did what we were asked to
Hindsight's
do.
always 20/20.
Yeah.
And I appreciate, I appreciate the opportunity to express and pass on. We haven't really had this opportunity per se, and that's what we're here for. So there's no ill, Pat, there's no ill meant, we're knocking around, and I appreciate the opportunity.
I so well remember being on committees with Carl Vogt, and we would hear it at least 5 times per meeting. And our mandate is, keep it focused, our mandate is, and maybe we have the wrong mandate.
Any other comments?
Last comment, I think we really have to get on the parking.
Don't disagree. That being said, seeing no additional discussion, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk, call the roll.
DeYoung,
Yes?
Skibout,
Due to fiduciary responsibilities, yes.
Peterson,
Yes.
Wackelman,
No.
Brandenhorst,
No.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Motion carried. Right?
I believe so.
Okay. Just want to make sure. At this point in the evening, we just got to double check, right? On to number 4, resolution number 5933, entitled, "A Resolution in Support of the Proposed Terms to be Included in an Agreement for Private Development by and between the City of Pella and Lely North America, Inc." Mike, if you'd explain, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to, and as the mayor stated, this proposed resolution would authorize the city administrator to begin work on a development agreement with Lely, North America. Now, as council is aware, Lely is currently located in Pella. We're very fortunate is that Lely has expressed a desire to expand their presence in our community, and specifically what they'd like to do is build a North American headquarters in Pella. Now, what Lely is planning on doing is constructing a new 150,000 square foot facility which would accommodate additional manufacturing, office, and training space. The estimated cost of this facility is roughly $15 million, and Lely is also expected to provide 15 new jobs within our communities. Now, overall, when we talk about Lely and talk about the North American headquarters located in Pella, Iowa, it's very important to note that currently Lely operates in more than 30 countries worldwide and also employs more than 1,300 people in this as well. Locally, the number of employees that we have in our community is roughly 55 employees. So with the new facility, we come 15 new jobs within our community. So let's go ahead, please, Cory. Now, in order to encourage Lely to expand their headquarters or build their new headquarters in Pella, the Iowa Economic Department Authority will be taking action, actually on December 21st, on an incentive package to Lely in the amount of just shy of $725,000. It's under the High Quality Jobs Program. Now, as a part of the state's financial offer, Lely is required to have a community local match, and this local match is, just to simplistically explain it, what the state requires is the valuation of the new building. The community's local match has to be based on the state's 5-year industrial tax abatement schedule. So if you look at $13 million, actually the building would be roughly valued between 13 and 15 million. The state says that you have to have a local match equal to the 5-year industrial tax abatement schedule. That amounts to about 45% of the property taxes waived over 5 years with that. What that equates to is roughly $936,000 in the required local match for the city of Pella. Now, what this proposed resolution states is because we're extremely early in the development process for Lely with it, is the city's, what the resolution says, the city intends to meet the local match, and it's a conditional intends, and I want to make sure everyone understands it is conditional, through a combination of off-site public infrastructure improvements, tax increment financing rebates, and would be provided under the terms of the development agreement. So in other words, these things would need to be addressed, but overall, when you look at the off-site infrastructure requirements potentially of the site, we are considering multiple sites, as well as the tax increment financing. Those would be likely included in the development agreement to ensure that they meet the $936,000. Now let's talk about the conditions, what this is all premised upon. So Corey, let's go ahead, please. Now, as we said, what it authorizes the city administrator to proceed with preparing a development agreement for the project. It's limited to the following conditions, and I want to make sure council is very much aware of this. This is extremely early in the development process for us, so what we really have here is a resolution of support, and this is intended for the state to help secure state economic development incentives. But the number one requirement is the project or the new building will be built within the corporate boundaries of the city of Pella. That's the number one condition. So wherever they choose, it needs to be within our corporate boundaries before any type of City support is also subject to Lely meeting all the city's legislative requirements, including the property being rezoned for its intended use, city approval of an urban renewal area, and also an amendment, or there could be an amendment to an existing urban renewal area. And ultimately, what will happen here is before anything gets awarded, the city council's gonna have to need to approve the development agreement. The development agreement will talk about the incentives, we'll talk about the conditions, it'll be a very thorough agreement, somewhere between 45 to 60 pages as well. In addition, Lely will be required to receive grants from the state of Iowa under the high quality jobs programs as well. So, Cory, let's go ahead, please. Now, from staff's recommendation this evening, we're recommending approval of the resolution. We view this to be a very conditional resolution that does not obligate anything but the city's support at this time. And what it simply authorizes by approval of this, it authorizes the city to begin working on a development agreement with Lely. But overall, when we consider this resolution, we just like to point out a few items for council's consideration. Lely has been an outstanding corporate partner for our community. We're very fortunate that they're considering expansion. We're also very fortunate that they're considering expansion in Pella, Iowa. We believe that the development takes place, it has the potential to expand the city's tax base and strengthen the local economy. And also, ultimately, we want to make sure that council's aware that this resolution is just conditional. It's upon completion of all the city's legislative requirements and the city council approving the development agreement. So really, what you're looking at is a letter or a resolution of support this evening, Mr. Mayor. And with that, we'd be more than happy to answer any questions the mayor or council may have on this item.
Thank you, Mike. Do I hear a motion for approval?
So moved.
Support. Baco supports Kebab. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Bakoven?
Yes.
Skibout. Peterson?
Yes.
DeYoung?
Yes.
Vanderhorst?
Yes.
Van Strylen?
Yes.
Motion carried. On to resolution number 5934, entitled a resolution adopting the City of Pella Immigration Enforcement Policy. Mike, can you explain, please?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Ultimately, maybe wondering why we're considering an immigration policy. This is a new requirement by the state of Iowa. In fact, cities are required, police departments specifically are required to adopt an immigration policy no later than January 1st of 2019. And basically what this resolution states is the city of Pella will fully comply with all legal requests for assistance in enforcement of federal immigration law. We are recommending approval this evening, Mr. Mayor. If the mayor and council will have questions on this, I'd like to refer to Chief Borkinski. Okay, so with that, that concludes the staff presentation, Mr. Mayor.
Motion for approval?
So moved.
Peterson, support Van Strylen. Any discussion?
I'd like to voice an objection with the state's heavy-handedness with this requirement, and that if we don't approve it, we lose all opportunity for state funding, which is, for us, a very important dynamic to take care of the city. So how are we going to say anything but yes to this? Our hands are pretty well tied. I think this is a very unfortunate situation that the state has put us in, because we just made a proclamation of home rule for the past 50 years, and this does not fit home rule. It's telling us what to do and how to do it. And I would like to address an issue with the chief, and that is, have we ever not assisted IDS or any immigration requests? And lo and behold, we didn't have to have the state tell us to do it. And we didn't even have to consider, well, are we gonna lose money to help make improvements and increase the quality of life and make this a safer community? No. I am really objecting to this heavy-handedness laid upon us. Now, I think it's because some cities want to do the sanctuary city piece. And so now all cities, all towns have to abide by this ruling that has been forced down our throats. And that's what I object to. I don't think we need to be treated that way from the state. And Chief, there's a piece in here that says legal detainment. Can you define that for us?
I certainly can. I can actually read it to you if you like.
I've read it before, but I want it made public.
You're asking about lawful detention? Or
Yes.
immigration? Okay.
No, the rest, it comes in one of the requirements that we have to meet as a city in order to get our state funding. It's in the, let me see, it's under A in the second paragraph. Inquiring about the immigration status of a person under a lawful detention, I don't know what that is, or under arrest.
Yes.
I do know what it is, by the way, but I want this made public.
Lawful, well, it's actually described within Senate File 481. A lawful detention would be somebody who is a suspect in a criminal event, not including traffic.
Okay, and what other offenses might it not include?
It might not include
Right.
potentially simple misdemeanors, depending on the class, but definitely traffic does not apply.
Right. Right.
And if there are witnesses or reporting a crime, it does not apply.
Very good. Or victims of a crime.
For victim of a crime.
Right, thank you, thank you.
And I'll wholeheartedly support Mr. Peters.
I don't disagree with the position that it's a heavy-handed approach that we're forced into, and I commend the chief, and I would also say that from my perspective, the City of Pella would always perform the laws of the community, the state, and the federal government to the best of all of our abilities, and this, to me, is just a redundant, heavy-handed approach to making people take a position that should be a given on our behalf. I don't disagree that it's, again, exactly as you pointed out, it's interesting that we're recognizing this is the 50-year anniversary of home rule, and bada boom, we're pretty much painted into a corner that we've got to support this. So I agree, and I commend law enforcement at all levels of enforcing the laws that they're charged with maintaining and enforcing. So, any other comments? Seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk, call the roll.
Peterson,
Yes.
You know, I'm really forced to say yes because of the way that this is phrased and the consequences, but no.
Stryland,
Yes.
Eva,
Yes.
DeYoung,
Yes.
Bachhoven,
Yes.
Reindeerhorst.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to ordinances. Number one, ordinance number 951, entitled an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the City of Pella, Iowa by conditionally amending the boundaries of the INS district to include the property legally described in Exhibit A and directing the zoning administrator to note the ordinance number and the date of this change on the official zoning map. This is the second reading. Mike, could you explain, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to, and I know it's getting late in this evening, it is the second reading, we gave a very in-depth presentation at the last meeting. And so I'll plan on giving a very abbreviated presentation, but if I'm going too fast or for missing details, stop me and be more than happy to answer any questions. The rezoning request we have this evening is from Mr. Bryce Dahl and Second Christian Reformed Church. They're proposing to rezone a parcel of property, 13 acres, that's located at the intersection of Oskaloosa Street and 40th Place. Just to orientate folks, Pella Christian High School is over here, Madison Elementary School is up here, right here, and Pella Sports Park would be located right over here. What's being proposed is to rezone the property from community commercial to institutional zoning. Purpose of this is to be able to build a new church on the site. It's very important to note that religious assembly use is permitted under considering this request, staff is recommending approval of the request this evening, but we're recommending conditional approval of it. And the conditional approval is to rezone the property to institutional, but make the only allowable use religious assembly use. And the reason for that is currently under the city zoning code, there's commercial buildings that are also allowable by right in institutionally zoned properties. If it's a blanket rezoning institutional, things such as indoor recreation, such as the work systems buildings would be built on that property, and not undergo the city's design review standards with it. And so from our standpoint, if the intent is to build a religious assembly facility without necessarily complying with the city's design standards, we certainly understand that request, but we think that ought to be a very narrow scope on that parcel with it. And so with the conditional rezoning, the only allowable use under this would be a religious assembly use, and also with the benefits of this, as the property is redeveloped in the future to 13 acres, not all the property will be used for the church purposes, but as rezoned or redeveloped in the future, they would be required to come back to the city council at that time and probably most likely make a rezoning request, very likely back to commercial. And we'd also be in a much more advantageous place to discuss design standards at that time for the future property. So staff's recommendation is to approve the rezoning request, limit the use to only religious assembly use, Mr. Mayor. We believe it complies with the city's zoning ordinance, and we also believe it aligns with the city's comprehensive plan. And with that, we'd be more than happy to answer any questions the mayor and council may have on this item.
Thank you, Mike. Do I hear a motion for approval? Steve Bowes. Support. Support Bachoven. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say as opposed, no, clerk call the roll.
Skibout.
Yes.
Bachoven.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Mayor, I move we set aside the third and final reading, or set aside the rules and place on third and final reading.
Support.
Motion to set aside rules and place on third and final reading, Skibout, support Bachoven. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say as opposed, no, clerk call the roll.
Skibout.
Yes.
Bachoven.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Motion
Move to
carried.
adopt.
Move to adopt by Skibout,
Support.
support Van Strylen. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say as opposed, no, clerk call the roll.
Skibout.
Yes.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Bachoven.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to number 2, ordinance number 952, entitled an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the City of Pella, Iowa, by amending the boundaries of the CC district to include the property legally described in Exhibit A, and directing the zoning administrator to note the ordinance number and the date of this change in the official zoning map. This also is the second reading. Mike, please explain.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, much with the same as the previous presentation, would be a very abbreviated presentation, we gave an in-depth presentation at the last meeting. This request is to rezone the property and being made by Broodmark Properties, and this evening is to rezone the properties from heavy industrial to medium commercial. They're located right up here in this purple area, or purple diagonal area. South Street is located right here, Oskaloosa Street's right up here, and Carson Street's right over here. The reason for the request is, first of all, we have a home, a residential home on Carson Street right here. Residential use is not allowed in heavy industrial zoning right now. And what that means is, from a zoning standpoint, we classify that property as legal non-conforming, which means if there's a catastrophe on that site, the house burns down, there's more than 60% damage to the structure. A residential house cannot be built on there in this place because it's currently zoned M2. The second reason is really to provide uniformity in the zoning districts of this block. Most of this block, if not all of this block, with the exception of this parcel right here, is already zoned CC community commercial. In our, as council's aware, in our commercial zoning districts, we do allow both single family, 2-family, and multi-family residential. Let's go ahead, please, Cory. And as you can see, the block that we're talking about right here, when you look at everything else that's in this block, is already CC and community commercial right in here. The only exception would be the 2 properties that we're considering this evening. Let's go ahead, please, Cory. If we can go straight to the recommendation, please. With that, Mr. Mayor, that was a very abbreviated presentation. We'd be more than happy to fill in the gaps on the request. But from staff standpoint, we believe that the request this evening aligns with the city's comprehensive plan on it. It also helps address the legal non-conforming issue with the current residential property that's located here. In addition, it also provides consistent zoning with this entire block, as everything within this block is already zoned CC community and commercial. So based on those reasons, we are recommending approval of this request this evening. Planning and Zoning Commission is discussed this at their November 26th meeting, and they unanimously approved the ordinance. So with that, Mr. Mayor, that concludes our presentation. We'd be more than happy to answer any questions the mayor and council may have on this item.
Thank you, Mike. Do I hear a motion for approval?
So moved.
Branderhorst, support DeYoung, discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Bachoven.
Yes.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Skiba.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Mayor, I want to make a mouthmark. I'd like to make a motion that we set aside the rules and place it third final reading.
Motion to waive the third and final reading and place third and final reading? What do you
Support.
say? Support. Hey, it is catching. It's moving this way.
Whatever you
Support, Van Strylen?
Don't let it get down.
All in, any discussion? All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Skiba.
Yes.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Bachoven.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Motion to adopt.
Move to adopt by Skiba.
Second.
Support by Peterson. Any discussion? After 9 o'clock, all bets are off, right? All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Skiba. Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Bachoven.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to claims. Abstract of bills number 2021. Do I hear a motion for approval?
Move to approve and issue warrants.
Motion to approve and issue warrants by Skiba.
Support.
Support DeYoung. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Skiba.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Bachoven.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Peterson.
Yes.
Motion carried. On to other business, public forum. Do any council members have any business that needs to be brought forth at this time? Do any members of the audience have any issues that should be brought forth at this time? Seeing none, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Peterson, support DeYoung. All in favor, please say yes. Opposed, no. Clerk call the roll.
Peterson.
Yes.
DeYoung.
Yes.
Bachoven.
Yes.
Vanderhorst.
Yes.
Van Strylen.
Yes.
Skiba.
We are adjourned.